talking about Paul. And in chapter 9, I read verses, in Acts chapter 9, I read verses 1 to 29. And this concerned a whole lot with Paul here. It concerned his conversion. It concerned him going to Damascus when he was blinded, and then later the Lord healed him and eyes. And then he went to Damascus, which was where he was going to go and arrest Christians, and he wound up preaching down there. And he found out that the Jews wanted to kill him, so he left there, went down to Jerusalem and spent time with the disciples who at first didn't trust him. But Barnabas showed up and was like, I know about him. You can't trust him now. And then it got to the point where in Jerusalem the Greeks wanted to kill him. So they got him out of Jerusalem. And Paul, who was born in Tarsus, wound up going back to Tarsus. And brother, I got to thinking about something that Donna Ham testified full gospel one night about, of how they'd been somewhere during that day, and it was a good day for them and everything, but it was a long day. And she was talking about seeing the lights at home. She was talking about over full gospel at night, Friday nights. You could see it from 18. And how wonderful that was to see those lights and coming home. And I got thinking about that, all the traveling we've done and everything, and to see the lights at home welcoming. But no matter, your house might be lit up like a military compound or Main Street in a big city. Those lights aren't going to compare to the lights of Jesus.
Amen.
When he comes. And we know we're going home then.
That's right.
Now, there's not a lot said about Paul there going back to Tarsus and everything. And that period of time for Paul he was roughly between 29 and 35 years of age during this time of his conversion, the preaching in Damascus, the preaching in Jerusalem, and then going back to Tarsus. In Acts 14, in the first 6 verses, this happened around 48 AD, so Paul is older now. Paul was in his early 40s. He might have been 43, somewhere through there. And he's traveling with Barnabas here, who he traveled a lot with. Now, he traveled with others, Timothy and everything, but Barnabas seemed like he was the one with him the most. Acts 14, verse 1 says, And it came to pass in Iconium that they went both together into the synagogue of the Jews, and so spake, that a great multitude, both of the Jews and also of the Greeks, believed. But the unbelieving Jews stirred up the Gentiles, and made their minds evil affected against the brethren. Verse 3 says, Long time therefore abode they, speaking boldly in the Lord, which gave testimony unto the word of his grace, and granted signs and wonders to be done by their hands. Verse 4 says, But the multitude of the city was divided, and part held with the Jews, and part with the apostles. And when there was an assault made both of the Gentiles and also of the Jews with their rulers, to use them despicably and to stone them, they were aware of it, and fled unto Lystra and Derbe, cities of Lycaonia, and unto the region that lieth round about. So once again here, you've got Paul and Barnabas here who are traveling. They're preaching in the synagogues. They're showing up. There's some of the Jews who are believing. There's some of the Greeks who are believing. But there are also people who don't want to hear this. And they're going around and they're stirring up the other people, anybody who would listen to them. And they're going to use them despitefully, it says, and to stone them. Stone who? Barnabas and Paul. if you look down in verses 19 and 20 of Acts 14, it says, and then there came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium, who persuaded the people, and having stoned Paul, drew him out of the city, supposing he had been dead. Howbeit, as the disciples stood round about him, he rose up and came into the city. And the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. Over here earlier, they're grouping up, they're going to kill him. And then they wind up stoning Paul here at Lystra. Now it doesn't say they stoned Barnabas, but Paul was stoned. And they took him out of the city. And the thing about it is, in verse 19, it says, and they came thither certain Jews from Antioch and Iconium. These people are traveling to Lystra here, intent on harming these people preaching Christ. And they got together. It wasn't just the people in Lystra, it was the people from outside Lystra came and stoned Paul. I don't know how many people were there. And that was Jewish capital punishment, was stoning. They actually had special pits out there with rocks around. And they take people out there and bind them. And they would sit there and throw rocks at them till they thought they were dead. And a lot of people died. Now you think about it, what an awful way that would be to die. Because unless you've got some strong-armed guy that can pitch and hit you in the head with a pretty good sized rock, you know, the temples is the thinnest part of your skull. Unless somebody really clubs you there and knocks you unconscious or kills you, this might go on for a while. If they don't like you, they might rock your feet for a while, or your legs, just to make sure you're going to suffer. Throw little rocks at you. Could you imagine being gravelled to death? How awful that would be. So they stoned Paul, and they left him outside the city, which is where these areas were. They didn't do this inside the cities. They took him out. You didn't want a dead body out there laying inside the city. They thought it was dead. But in verse 20 it says, as the disciples stood round about him, he rose up and came into the city. And the next day he left with Barnabas, going to Derbe. Now, Paul's determination, you look at all the things he went through, and he kept getting up and he kept preaching. Now here he is. Who knows how sore, how wounded this man is? And maybe wisely he's leaving thinking they might come back and finish the job or something. But he leaves with Barnabas. He's going back to preaching. You know, you can get upset with somebody and quit doing something because of something somebody said or something somebody done. And here's Paul. See, when this started, back when Paul was blinded, it said the Lord showed Paul in a vision sufferings that was going to come. Paul knew these things were coming. And he kept going. I mean, here he is, been beat down, been stoned, all this travel, which couldn't be easy. You know, if I got stoned yesterday, I'm probably going to lay somewhere for a while.
Yeah.
I want to get comfortable. I want to have medicine. You know, they used honey. They used oil for medicine and stuff. There wasn't a, CVS on the corner down here. They learned how to treat stuff naturally. But he suffered. And maybe somebody asked him, Paul, what are we going to do? Well, tomorrow we're going to Derby. What are you going to do down there? We're going to preach. They ain't going to like you down there any more than they like you over here. I don't care. I heard a preacher this morning talking about how he preached for a long, long time. He witnessed to a whole lot of people, and there's a whole lot more people said no than yes. But that didn't mean for him to stop. In Acts 16, here, Acts 16, verses 16 to 23. And it came to pass, as we went in prayer, a certain damsel possessed with a spirit of divination, met us, which brought her masters much gain by soothsaying. The same followed Paul and cried, saying, These men are the servants of the Most High God, which show unto us the way of salvation. And this she many days. But Paul, being grieved, turned and said to the Spirit, I command thee in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And he came out the same hour. And when her masters saw that the hope of their gains was gone, they caught Paul and Silas and drew them into the marketplace under the rulers and brought them to the magistrates, saying, These men, being Jews, do exceedingly trouble our city, and teach customs which are not lawful for us to receive, neither to observe, being Romans. And the multitude rose up together against them, and the magistrates rent off their clothes and commanded to beat them. And when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safely. Now, this was around 51 AD. Paul at this time, 45, 46 years old. He's traveled some with Timothy. But right now, he is traveling with Silas. This is the story of where they wind up in jail. And they're singing at midnight. Well, this is the precursor to it. Why did they wind up in prison? Because these people out here have this woman, a soothsayer. She's got an evil spirit in her, but for some reason, she's tracking Paul and Silas and whoever else is there with them. She's following them. And it finally got to the point where Paul turns around and looks at her and tells the demon to leave her. In the name of Jesus, the spirit has got to go. Well, now she's no longer able to predict these things. You see it nowadays with things like horoscopes and magic 8 balls and crystal balls and all these things. Soothsaying. People are curious about what's going to happen in the future. Can you tell me my future? Kind of thing. And this woman was able to do this with this evil spirit, could see things. So she had these men, okay, who were using her to do this soothsaying, and they're getting rich off this thing. Well, Paul comes along. Actually, it talks about she followed them. She saw something in Paul and Silas and these other men. She could see God in them. So I'm thinking this poor woman's miserable. I'm thinking this poor woman's tired of being used. Who knows how she was treated if she said something that wasn't right. And Paul sees her faithfully coming and coming and coming to the point where he's like, all right, this evil spirit's got to go now. once the evil spirit left her, she's just a normal woman now. The men who were using her are furious. You want to see most people mad? Take their money away from them. Especially an evil person who is using someone else for money. And now that person's not useful anymore. So it's funny, you know, I've heard people talk about it. You want to make a thief mad, steal from him. That's true. So these people here who were using this poor woman, who had a demonic spirit in her, who could foresee things, and Jesus took the demon out. Paul prayed for her. The demon left. Now she's like everybody else. So these men who apparently had some kind of power and influence was like, well, here's what we're going to do. They took them to the magistrates and saying, these men being Jews do exceedingly trouble our city and teach customs which are not lawful for us to receive, neither to observe, being Romans. The problem with the Romans and a lot of other pagans, everything's God. Wind God, sun God, grass God, you know, animal God, love God, you know, anger God, war God, all these things. Paul and Barnabas are showing up, there's one God. You need to believe in Jesus. They people had to see the power of what Paul and Barnabas and these men, you know, the Spirit of the Lord with them, what that was able to do. It took the evil spirit out of this woman. If I had somebody in my family with an evil spirit and I saw this done, I'm going to go to Paul and Barnabas and say, would you please come and pray for them? That wasn't happening. So the Romans dragged them off in front of the magistrates. The magistrates are something we still have today. And complaining about this, saying they're teaching things that are wrong. And the multitude rose up together against them. And the magistrates rent off their clothes and commanded to beat them. Now it says, and when they had laid many stripes upon them, they cast them into prison, charging the jailer to keep them safe. So far, Paul has been blinded, been healed. 2 times he found out people were wanting to kill him, and he escaped. He's traveled over here, he's preaching in the synagogues. This bunch showed up, they got their hands on him. And Barnabas. And it says, when they laid many stripes upon them. Now, y'all probably heard this before. The Romans figured out that they could whip somebody 39 times, and most people lived. Sadly, I don't know how many people died with them experimenting on people until they figured this out. But they usually didn't. They stopped at 39. Okay. But it says here, they laid many stripes upon them. It was not 39. All right. The whips they used had multiple flanges to them, strips, whatever you want to call it. Straps. And a lot of times they tied bone, glass, all kinds of stuff into it. That's what they done to Jesus. That's the reason they almost beat him to death. This here just says stripes, which would be bad enough. So Paul here, he's already been stoned, left for dead. Who knows what condition he's in? Now this is later. It is. It's years later. And now they're going to drag him down there, and they're going to beat them, and they put him into prison. And we talked about what condition prisons were. This was not a place you want to be. Okay, the same Motel 8 they're dragging him down to. And they take him, put him in prison. And then they charged the jailer to keep them safe. So here's Paul, traveling, being attacked, being mistreated, people want to kill him. Have you ever had somebody show up with good news for you and it made you smile, you want to cry? This was the evil in these people that could see Jesus in Paul and the people, Timothy, Barnabas, other people who traveled with him. And they couldn't stand it. You know? So later on, this is about 6 years later now, Paul was in his early 50s, probably 50 or 51. In Acts 21, verses 25 to 32. Now this is Jerusalem. As touching the Gentiles which believe, we have written and concluded that they observe no such thing, save only that they keep themselves from things offered to idols, from blood, from strangling, and from fornication. Now these are Jewish laws. Verse 26, then Paul took the men, and the next day, purifying himself with them, entered into the temple to signify the accomplishment of the days of purification, until that an offering should be offered for every one of them. And when the 7 days were almost ended, the Jews which were of Asia, when saw him in the temple, stirred up all the people and laid hands on him. Verse 28, crying out, men of Israel, help, this is the man that teacheth all men everywhere against the people, the law, and this place. And further brought Greeks also into the temple, and hath polluted this holy place. Verse 29, for they had seen before with him in the city Trophimus and Ephesian, whom they supposed that Paul had brought into the temple. Verse 30, and all the city was moved, and the people ran together, and they took Paul and drew him out of the temple, and forthwith the doors were shut. Verse 31, and as they went about to kill him, tidings came from the chief captain of the band that all of Jerusalem was in an uproar, and verse 32 said, who immediately took soldiers and centurions and ran down unto them, and when they saw the chief captain and the soldiers, they left beating and Paul. So here they are traveling. Damascus, Jerusalem, Tarsus. They've come back now to Jerusalem. They're in there preaching, and Paul's here talking about the purification of himself. Now the Jewish people had a thing that they had different purification things. Okay? It's like if you sinned, there were certain sins. If you sinned, you were unclean until sundown. This was the beginning of the next day. But for that day, you were unclean. So, Paul and them's down there preaching. They're in the temple. These people aren't liking what Paul's preaching, and Barnabas and whoever else. Paul's head guy. He's going to get talked about. Okay. If I go into a business and I wind up talking to a boss, and there's 14 other people around, if I tell the story, I'm probably going to talk about the boss, even though there were other people there. That's kind of what's going on here. Paul was the leader. At one time, he was the leader of the Pharisees out here arresting Christians. Now he's the leader of this group going around to different synagogues preaching Jesus. These Jews here, they're going through this purification thing, which was different purifications, lasted different times, they were for different things. Paul's in there preaching. Then they start telling this story about, well, wait a minute, didn't he bring an Ephesian into the temple? Accusing him. I went to a church one time, the pastor greeted me going in, there was one person spoke to me all night long. I've not been back. He was busy after service, so he didn't say bye. I understood that for him. But I sat right next to people, right at him beside me every day. Well, I didn't say hello either, so part of that's on me. But I had the feeling like they had in that church who they wanted in that church. And if they're saved, they're going to heaven. But I was out of place, kind of. Well, here's these people in this synagogue. It's like, wait a minute, he brought an Ephesian in here. What's he doing bringing this person in here? I have seen this. People being shunned because of how they look. Get to know a person. Find out what they're really like inside. There's these things called red potatoes. They're ugly as all get it. They taste good. I have met people that if you met them out on the street, you're saved, kind of thing. Yeah. I've seen people clean cut, just as pretty as all get out, and just as mean as a snake. So we got to be careful. Tim's big on hugging that, shaking hands. Good.
Yep.
Sister Louder down at Victory Fellowship, Centerville, South Carolina. Marshall Blevins over at Christian Home. First time I went in, greeted me with smiling, handshakes, and glad you. Thank you, Lord. I look pretty rough, y'all. I do. Glad you. Welcome, people.
Right.
This is the Lord's house.
Amen.
You put signs on it wherever you want to. It better be the Lord's house. Paul and Barnabas is down here preaching in the Lord's house at this time, down here in the synagogues. And these people are like, look what you're doing. You're not following the customs. You're teaching different things. All this, one thing and another. You bringing people in here. Why are they coming in here? Here's what we're going to do. Not only are the Jews going to help, we're going to go get the Greeks to come in here and help, and we're going to beat the snot out of you. And they started beating them. Okay? This had started. Until they drug him out of the temple. Now, I was in church one time. A man showed up and just went off on everything. Talking about it was an evil place and all this one thing and another, the snake church, whatever. I remember that. They put his fellow out the door. It was a church the man went to. These people come in here and take Paul. Said drew him out of the temple. Yeah. And then they shut the doors. Why are you shutting the doors of the temple? You're going to try to make sure he don't go back in. Is that the reason you're shutting this door? And it says they were about to kill him until the news came, tidings came under the chief captain of the band that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. So here comes the law, I guess. And what do they walk up on? They're down here beating the snot out of Paul and Barnabas and whoever else. And he puts a stop to it. They left the beating of Paul. but they weren't done with him. So once again, Paul here is suffering. And over in chapter 22, in verse 17, verse 17 to 29, same year. And it came to pass that when I was come again in Jerusalem, even while I prayed in the temple, I was in a trance, and saw him saying unto me, Make haste, and get thee quickly out of Jerusalem, for they will not receive thy testimony concerning me. And I said, Lord, they know I am in prison, and beat in every synagogue them that believe on thee. And when the blood of thy martyr Stephen was shed, I was also standing by, and consenting unto his death, and kept the raiment for them that slew him. And he said unto me, Depart, for I will send thee far hence unto the Gentiles. So he's been preaching to the Jews here, and they keep beating on him. The Lord said, I'm going to send you to the Gentiles. And when they gave him audience unto this word, and then lifted up their voices, and said, Away with such a fellow from the earth, for it is not fit that he should live. And as they cried out and cast off their clothes, they threw dust in the air. The chief captain commanded him to be brought into the castle, and bade that he should be examined by scourging, that he might know whereof they cried so against him. And as they bound him with thongs, Paul said unto the centurion that stood by, Is it lawful for you to scourge a man that is a Roman, and uncondemned? When the centurion heard that, he went and told the chief captain, say, Take heed what thou doest, for this man is a Roman. Then the chief captain came and said unto him, Tell me, art thou a Roman? And he said, Yea. And then the chief captain answered, With the great sum obtained I this freedom. And Paul said, I was freeborn. Then straightway they departed from him that should have examined him, and the chief captain was also afraid, after he knew that he was a Roman, and because he had bound him. So Paul almost gets scourged here. This was one that did happen. So they bound him, took him down there, and several things in these verses here, but it talks about how that it was cried out against him, that he is not fit to live. And they cried out and cast off their clothes and threw dust into the air. And brother, I've heard this talked about before, that the reason that the Jews would take dirt and throw it up in the air on themselves was it was a similar, it's not the right word, an example of bird. It was like, oh, we're suffering, we died to you, buried, kind of thing. That was where the dust, throwing dust in the air came from. The chief captain here demanded he be brought into the castle. He's no longer in the temple now. And it's interesting that word castle being in the Bible. And bade that he should be examined by scourging. So he's going to beat him. And they bound him up. But before they could whip him, they found out he was a Roman. Now, Paul was a Jew and a Pharisee. How did he wind up being a Roman? Was that where he lived? He wasn't born there. He didn't grow up there. Somewhere along the way, Paul became a Roman citizen. Think about that. And in this case, it protected him because it was unlawful for Romans to be treated this way. Now, the Jews, the rest of the Gentiles, these other folks, Samaritans, this law didn't pertain to them. But in Rome, the Romans were protected by the law. And this here saved Paul at this point You know, you think about it, 2 times he escaped by fleeing because first the Jews wanted to kill him and then the Greeks wanted to kill him. So he has fled at least 2 places here. And now he's being saved from scourging. So Paul, with everything he went through, sadly, it could have been worse. I mean, we read a minute ago, they stoned him, they thought they'd kill him. He's been beat. So far, he's been blinded and healed. He said the Jews want to kill him, the Greeks want to kill him. He wound up getting beat. He wound up almost getting beat. You know, if I got stoned and left for dead, I might change my mind about some things. But Paul didn't. And he kept going. And no matter what they did to Paul, he kept going. You know, there's been times I didn't go to church because I didn't feel good, or it's thunderstorming and I don't walk with Christ. You know, I'll be ashamed of that. Here's Paul, knowing what they're going to do to him. He kept going. Things he went through, he kept going. A lot of people, including me, I'll see y'all. I'm saved going to heaven. Paul knew those people needed to preach to. And this was so important to him, he had to keep going no matter what they did to him physically. I appreciate y'all listening.